I'd like at this point to get a feel for how many people would like to speak. So first of all, could you raise your hand if you are someone who would like to speak? And we'll see how many people. Okay, so right, we'll start here and we'll work our way around the room. And you can ask direct questions to members of the panel, make a comment, if we can keep it reasonably short, because it's quite a long session.
I will keep it short. My name is Helle. I'm a journalist and writer. I'm based in Denmark, and I've been writing about political Islam and freedom of speech for about 10 years. I would just add that what you're sort of presenting as problems are, of course, problems not only for UK and France, but also for the Scandinavian countries, on a minor scale yet, but it would be very good with some kind of cooperation among the borders. And thank you for a fine conference.
Yes, gentleman here in the red pullover.
In a recent referendum in Switzerland, a movement was passed, or motion was passed, to ban building of new mosques. And this was spearheaded, so I understand it, by a woman on the internet, a feminist. The ruling liberal elite were very much against it, but it passed and is now law. What is the panel's attitude toward this lady?
I think it was actually about minarets rather than actual mosques. Yes. I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that.
Should we use some comments?
Okay, yes, so we'll take another comment and then. There's somebody, yes, behind.
Yes, I just want to make the point that I think in this country there's a lot of people that are quite worried about Islamism, but they're quite worried to stand up against it. But what I wanted to say was that I think that the problem is that if they leave it like 5 years, 10 years, the problem will just get worse. So like sort of this is the time that you have to be focused on these things, like the lady who was speaking about France. France has already a bigger Muslim population, so the problem seems to have got bigger. And I think that people here need to wake up to this and realize that even though they may not want to do anything about it, this is really the time to be confronting these people. Also, the other point I just wanted to say was that I noticed that a lot of Islamists, when they write their literature, I think that they are trying to sort of blur the lines in regards to human rights, because some of them, they write leaflets saying how they are for human rights. And I think that a lot of people get quite mixed messages if they come across such literature. I think that this is something to be looked at maybe and just assessed a little bit. Because, even people like me sort of got confused when you read something like that. So, yeah, thank you.
Go over here.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a point raised by Gita and also by Peter, and it's to do with, in terms of the state, in terms of who they negotiate with, and the ways in which we can circumvent the Muslim Council of Britain, because obviously that's been the history over the last few years in terms of policymakers in the Community Department of dealing exclusively with the Muslim Council of Britain, others like that, who self-appointed patriarchs often in their communities. I grew up in Camden, in the Somali Muslim community, and one of the issues that I've had over the years is in terms of the schooling that happens for kids that go to madrasas on the weekend, where I've been with my nieces and nephews to some of these weekend schools, and repeatedly what happens is every Saturday and Sunday, they're basically told not to associate themselves in their normal school with their friends who are often non-Muslim. So every other week I have a situation where my little nephew or niece says to me, "Uncle, should I be friends with someone who's non-Muslim?" And I say, "Well, of course you should be." And my real worry is it's obviously the faith schools, which Peter was talking about, which I think is completely wrong, and it's completely ridiculous that the Labour government was pursuing this whole faith-based agenda, particularly faith schools. But the fact that we have these madrasas up and down the country, like often just people set them up in their homes, they're very hard to regulate, and that's the breeding ground. That's where young people in Muslim communities are being taught these things. So one about the Muslim Council of Britain, what to do about it, what can moderates, if you like, those who are labelled as Muslims or as such, do about building alliances which go beyond the, if you like, the control of the Muslim Council of Britain. And what can we actually do really to start taking the ground back, because that's what these people have done. So if you come to that environment, as I do sometimes, and talk to people and say to them, we should be teaching our children not this stuff, you know, and we should really be opening up their minds. And if you come from that sort of viewpoint and you challenge some of these myths and some of these dangerous, frankly, dangerous opinions that are being taught to the children, then you're accused of being anti-Muslim or being an Islamophobe yourself. So it seems that 20, 30 years ago in this country, there was space in the Muslim community for secularists and humanists and liberals to come in as Muslims or ex-Muslims and to speak up for those values. But that's long gone, and it's very sad. And we, as people who are Muslims or labeled as such or ex-Muslims, have to really start coming forward and taking that ground and taking that fight against these Islamists.
I'd just like to make a comment to Rumi's studies on and the book on the Canadian experience. I'm a Canadian Croatian, and having arrived to Canada at age 14 from the communist Yugoslavia, not really knowing that I was Croatian, because my parents were too worried to tell me that, because that would be a sign of nationalism, and therefore my father would go to jail. Arriving to Canada at age 14, it was the start of multiculturalism in the 70s. And I grew up being, well, it became a religion almost, if one can say it. Canadian multiculturalism was the most wonderful thing that a young person like myself in high school and then university could experience. I was so intensely proud of being Canadian. At age 18, I was offered a job at a heritage language program to teach Croatian to children. And it turned out that they wanted somebody in the north end, northwest end of the city. The rest of the children went to a Croatian church where the priests and nuns would be teaching them the Croatian language. So I ended up being the only one, the secular Croatian language teacher to the children in that community. The money was given by the federal government to these heritage language programs and to teach the language, and heritage language programs on the radio and television. Every Sunday for 6 years, because I endured 6 years of this, the priest would, on his radio program, tell everybody not to send their children to the communist teaching in Rexdale. And it lasted 6 years, and I was known. And it was not a joke, because at that time, remember, I don't know if some of you remember, Croatians were the terrorists. Croatians would hijack airplanes and put bombs. And as a matter of fact, one of my students ended up with a bomb on the door. So it came to me once arriving to England, in the last 5-6 years, it was almost as if I was leaving a religion too. And that was Canadian multiculturalism. It was the realization that there are groups and there are people that will use multiculturalism to simply use it to their own ends, to their own political ends. And really, it is the children that end up being brainwashed.
Thank you. I want to bring Rumi in a moment.